Hello, I'm Tsering Passang, founder of the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. We are a human rights and advocacy group with the core objects to raise awareness of China's wrongdoings, including its unlawful aggressions on the peoples and its neighbors, to garner support for the peoples of Tibet, East Turkestan, as well as for those who continue to endure persecutions under the Chinese regime. Just like the Tibetans and Uyghurs, we believe the people of Hong Kong should have the same right to determine their own future. They should be allowed to enjoy their freedoms as per the Sino-British Joint Declaration, One Country, Two Systems principle, agreed between the UK and China. Today, we are hosting a special virtual seminar ahead of the commemoration of the 62nd anniversary of the Tibetan National Uprising Day of Lhasa, Tibet's capital, on 10th March 1959. It also coincides with the ongoing month-long peace walk, some 500 kilometers distance from Dharamsala, the headquarters of the Tibetan Government-in-exile, to Delhi, by renowned Tibetan writer and activist Mr. Tenzin Tsundue, who is leading a campaign, Repeal One China Policy. Tsundue is joining us today. Here in the UK, we are hoping to run this parallel campaign, Repeal One China Policy, very soon. Our today's topic is China, struggle for freedom in Tibet, East Turkestan, and Hong Kong. This topic is very appropriate as we continue to witness the onslaught of people of Tibet, East Turkestan, and Hong Kong by China. To give a glimpse of the deteriorating situation, I'm going to read an excerpt from the most recent statement to the UN Human Rights Council, the 46th session, delivered on 22nd February 2021, just last week, by the British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. I quote, "We stand with a growing number of international partners, UN experts, and NGOs concerned about the deteriorating human rights situation that we see in China. No one can ignore the evidence anymore. In Hong Kong, the rights of the people are being systematically violated. The national security law is a clear chilling effect on the personal freedoms. Free and fair legislative election must take place, with a range of opposition voices allowed to take part. In Tibet, the situation remains deeply concerning, with access still heavily restricted. Meanwhile, we see almost daily reports now that shine a new light on China's systematic human rights violations perpetrated against Uyghur Muslims and other minorities in Xinjiang. The situation in Xinjiang is beyond the pale. The reported abuses, which include torture, forced labor, and forced sterilization of women, are extreme, and they are extensive. They are taking place on an industrial scale. It must be our collective duty to ensure this does not go unanswered." Quote close. So for this virtual discussion, we are very delighted to be joined by an amazing panel of experts. We have Burzine, Waghmar, and Tenzin Tsundue joining us from India, and then Benedict Rogers, Rahima Mahmut, and Priyajit Debsarkar from London. I wish to extend my sincere appreciation and thanks to all our panelists for their time and taking part in this important discussion. We at the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities believe that by bringing people together of the like-minded causes would not only help to foster better relations through knowledge and experience sharing, as well as building networks, but it would also be more impactful by targeting the common opponents altogether. I know some of the panelists for many years and am a huge admirer of their selfless work and dedication for their respective causes. I wish to mention a special thanks to Benedict Rogers, whom I have known for some years now, and he has always been willing to support any causes, including the Tibetan. I have been witnessing how Ben set up the Hong Kong Watch and made friends in the British Parliament and beyond. Ben, we need friends, more friends like you here in the UK to educate the British public and to expose the Chinese government's continued lies and cover-ups. Now, without taking any more time, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Mr. Burzine Waghmar, who is going to chair today's session. Burzine is a distinguished scholar and expert on international and South Asian affairs, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. At the SOAS, Burzine Waghmar holds affiliations with the South Asia Institute, London Middle East Institute, Center for the Study of Pakistan, and Center for Iranian Studies. He is also the school's librarian for South Asia and Indo-Iranian languages. His reading and research skills on the history, religions, languages, and cultures of the Silk Road cover ancient Xinjiang, Tibet, and their interactions with Iran and Greater Historic India, and their dialects and communities along the Irano-Pak, Sino-Pak, and Arp-Pak borders, Balochistan, that's Trans-Karakoram Tract, Gilgit-Baltistan, northern areas. Mr. Waghmar's linguistic and historical research focused on Tibet and East Turkistan during the first millennium AD and their trans-global interactions. So over to Burzine now.
Thank you, Mr. Passang, and to the Global Alliance for affording me this opportunity. It is an entirely pleasant duty to anchor this webinar at a most timely moment, and it is extremely good of you to have us and the other panelists for this session. Without further ado, may I commence with an introduction of our respective speakers today. Londoner and alumnus of the School for Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, I'm delighted to state, is Benedict Rogers, founder and since September 2020, Chief Executive of Hong Kong Watch. He is concomitantly Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission, East Asia Team Leader of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, and advisor to the World Uyghur Congress and Interparliamentary Alliance on the PRC. A British human rights activist who has resided in Hong Kong, Mr. Rogers has also spoken out against the incarceration of Nathan Law, Joshua Wong, and Alex Cho following the 79-day umbrella movement of Hong Kong 2014. He has, besides writing op-eds for the Wall Street and International Herald Tribune, authored 3 works on Burma, including a searing expose of Than Shwe and the decimation of the Karen, Burma's 3rd largest ethnic inhabitants, and co-authored with Bishop Joseph D'Souza, President of the All India Christian Council, On the Side of Angels, Justice, Human Rights, and Kingdom Mission. Next, we will have Rahima Mahmut, who is Great Britain's leading and most dignified face of Uyghur plight as the British representative to the World Uyghur Congress. A trained singer and musician of her East Turkistan homeland, she has collaborated with Professor Rachel Harris, the Uyghur ethnomusicologist at SOAS, on performances. And Rahima Mahmut is also the award-winning translator of East Turkestan Party founder Soringul Chanishav's diary-cum-autobiography entitled The Land Drenched in Tears, detailing the invidious Cultural Revolution years in Mao's Red China and the devastation visited upon Northwest China by the progressive politics that undergird leftist mismanagement, sordid socialism, and abysmal authoritarianism. In no mean measure, due to Rahima Mahmut's efforts, all political parties in Great Britain, conservative and unionist, Labour and Liberal Democrats now remain more than cognizant of China's hegemonic agenda, impelled by Han chauvinism and the incremental cult of personality attached to Premier Xi, now committed to engendering instability near abroad and eliminating alienated, discriminated non-Han minorities, both ethno-linguistic and confessional, since the inception of this communist regime 7 decades ago. My next speaker will be Indian-born Tibetan poet and activist Tenzin Tsundue, who is an alumnus of Madras's Loyola College and Bombay University. And it is in Bombay that Tenzin made his mark on 2 counts in 2002. First, as the maiden awardee of the Outlook Picador Award for Poetry with his anthology entitled Crossing the Border, a somber reminder of the arduous, fateful trek his parents made with the Dalai Lama to India, and where they remain domiciled ever since 1959. Second, Tenzin welcomed visiting Premier Zhu Rongji at the Oberoi, Bombay, in January 2002 by boldly unfurling his banner marked Free Tibet, China Get Out. And for good measure, he also greeted Premier Wen Jiabao similarly in Bangalore 2005. Tenzin's writings have also appeared in International Pen, and he has started up being arrested by the Indian police on 16 separate occasions, even when he is miles away from any Chinese state entourage visiting India. On Tibetan Lunar New Year, Losar, February 2021, Tenzin embarked on his one-man march to New Delhi, intending to reach the Indian capital on 10th March, Tibetan Uprising Day, and urged the world's largest democracy to take a moral lead in reconsidering its one China policy. We will assuredly follow this pilgrim poet's progress in the coming fortnight. And lastly, it is with great pleasure I also introduce our last speaker, Mr. Priyajit Debsarkar, an independent Indian political analyst and author, also a Londoner, and contributor to several fora, as the author of The Last Raja of West Pakistan, a seminal study of the erstwhile ruler of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which was, despite the title, in erstwhile East Pakistan until it became the Sovereign Republic of Bangladesh in 1972. Mr. Debsarkar has been instrumental in stirring centennial events during the year 2020 on the founding father of Bangladesh, Mujibur Rahman, in Britain. He continues to lecture and write extensively on the history and politics of historic East Bengal, and his most recent monograph is on Pakistan, Atlantic Attack and Arbitration, which covers the August Atlantic incident following the Indo-Pakistan Kargil War during the summer of 1999. A warm welcome to all my speakers, and Mr. Rogers, may I request you now to afford us a curtain raiser on where we stand in February 2021 with Hong Kong, followed by Rahima Mahmut, then Tenzin Tsundue, and lastly, Mr. Debsarkar. Each 10 minutes to afford all our listeners and viewers of where we stand currently and, well, where we are going. So over to you first, Mr. Rogers. Thank you.
You can hear me?
Yes, Mr. Rogers, you're audible to me.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's a very great privilege to share this platform with the other speakers and to speak on this very important topic. And let me say, firstly, that I'm very grateful in your introduction. You referenced a number of my affiliations, because I want to say from the outset that although my focus of my remarks today is on the situation in Hong Kong, I'm deeply engaged with and very concerned about the situation of the Uyghurs. I indeed work closely with Rahima Mahmut in the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. And I'm equally concerned about the situation in Tibet, which in particular the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission and IPAC have highlighted. And I think that it's very important that as the international community quite rightly pays increasing attention to the situation both of the Uyghurs and Hong Kong, it's very important that we don't forget Tibet, which of course has been suffering longer than any of the other issues under the brutal CCP repression. I think it's also important to say, of course, that there are many other groups in China under the CCP's rule that are also facing intensifying repression, particularly the Christian community, Falun Gong, and others. So really, everybody living under the CCP's rule is facing great repression and crackdown. Can I also, before I come on to Hong Kong, just take a moment to also express solidarity with the people of Myanmar or Burma today. Today has been the bloodiest day since the coup a month ago. At least 23 people have been killed. And of course, the CCP's role in refusing to condemn the coup, refusing to support UN Security Council action, and indeed supporting the military with arms and other support, makes Myanmar relevant to the whole question about the CCP's behavior as well. But let me come on to Hong Kong. Just to give you some background, I lived in Hong Kong for the first 5 years after the handover from September 1997 to 2002. In fact, I went directly after graduating from SOAS to Hong Kong and began my first job there as a journalist. And I can honestly say that at that time, I really believed that one country, two systems would work for Hong Kong. It certainly was working when I lived there. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but certainly basic freedoms for the people of Hong Kong were protected then and for subsequent years until perhaps a decade or so ago when they began to be unraveled. The turning point for me was the 2014 umbrella movement, where I saw these very inspiring protests in Hong Kong, and of course, but resulting in an ongoing crackdown. As has been mentioned, I started to advocate in a personal capacity for Hong Kong at that time. I subsequently campaigned for Nathan Law and Joshua Wong and Alex Chow when they were jailed in 2017. I'd actually hosted Nathan and Joshua in the UK prior to that. And as a result of my campaigning for them, I felt that there was a real need to establish an organization to advocate for Hong Kong. And so hence I founded Hong Kong Watch in 2017. But just 2 months before launching Hong Kong Watch, I was denied entry to Hong Kong on the orders of Beijing. And that was, of course, insignificant by comparison with what's happened now. But it was one of the early warning signs that things were going wrong in Hong Kong. What we are seeing today in Hong Kong is nothing short of the total and absolute dismantling of Hong Kong's promised freedoms or autonomy and very grave, flagrant breaches of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. We saw the erosion of Hong Kong's freedoms building up over previous years, but in 2019, the proposed extradition law resulting in mass protests for many months was really the turning point. The police brutality in those protests was truly shocking. And then, of course, the final, or one of the final nails in the coffin of Hong Kong's freedoms was the imposition almost overnight and with absolutely no scrutiny or debate or accountability of the extremely draconian national security law on the 1st of July last year. And that national security law totally tears up any freedoms of expression, association, assembly, and other basic freedoms. It criminalizes subversion, secession, and collusion with foreign forces. And of course, those terms are terms that are heard in many countries, but usually they are properly and carefully and narrowly defined. The problem with the national security law is that essentially the definition of those terms is so broad that anyone talking to someone like me or to a foreign politician or a foreign journalist could be committing collusion with foreign forces. and anyone criticizing the Beijing regime could be accused of subversion. And the national security law, of course, has an extraterritorial clause, so that it's not only people in Hong Kong who can be in breach of the law. Anyone, anywhere in the world, can be violating the national security law by criticizing Beijing. So in theory, at least, what I'm saying here today may be in breach of the national security law pretty much every day since the national security law was introduced. I've been in breach of it several times a day. But the national security law was not actually the final nail in the coffin of Hong Kong's freedoms, because since then we've seen a number of other terrible developments. We saw the disqualification and subsequent resignation of the entire pro-democracy camp from Hong Kong's Legislative Council, turning the legislature from one where there was a pro-democracy presence into simply a Beijing puppet rubber stamp body. We've seen prominent pro-democracy leaders like Jimmy Lai and Agnes Chow and Joshua Wong, of course, again, jailed, and Jimmy Lai facing several charges under the national security law. We've seen just in recent weeks the proposal to introduce a national security curriculum in schools for children as young as 6, to indoctrinate them to believe in Beijing's policies, to believe that how wonderful the CCP is, and to not speak political slogans or sing political songs, and to be in line with the national security law. Just in the last few days, we've seen news of an oath being required for elected district councillors, the only remaining pro-democracy elected officials who are still in office at the moment, will be required to take an oath of allegiance. And again, the definitions are so vague that it's highly likely that the authorities will use this to disqualify those who were elected in November 2019 and who won an overwhelming majority for the pro-democracy camp in the district council elections. And then we come to events this very day in Hong Kong, because on the 6th of January this year, 55 pro-democracy candidates, former legislators, and activists were arrested. And today we heard the very sad news that 47 of them have been formally charged under the national security law with conspiracy to subvert state power. And their crime was what? It was simply holding primary elections last July to choose their candidates for the expected Legislative Council elections, which of course were subsequently postponed for a year using COVID as the excuse. But 600,000 Hong Kongers took part in those primary elections. But as a consequence, 47 of the organizers of those elections, those primary elections, have now been charged. And if convicted, they could face at least 10 years in jail, potentially in some cases up to life imprisonment. It's the case now that almost all pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong are either in jail, in exile, or on trial awaiting sentences. So in conclusion, what do we do to confront this challenge in Hong Kong and in the other areas under CCP repression? Well, I believe that the time has come for the imposition of Magnitsky targeted sanctions against officials in the Chinese Communist Party regime and in the Hong Kong government for human rights violations and breaches of an international agreement. I think there is a real need for a specific UN mechanism to address the human rights crisis in China, including Hong Kong. We should be urging those countries that still have extradition agreements with Hong Kong to end those extradition agreements. And we should be encouraging what we call a lifeboat rescue policy to enable Hong Kongers who need and want to get out of Hong Kong to find a place of sanctuary somewhere in the democratic world. The UK has led the way on that with its British National Overseas Passport offer. But there are many Hong Kongers who aren't eligible for the BNO passport, who who need a place of safety. And so Canada and Australia have already done this, and we're trying to encourage the United States and European countries and others to do their part as well. And then finally, more broadly, I think it's time for everybody who is concerned about human rights under the CCP's rule to unite. And that means, firstly, democracies around the world uniting. And I'm really pleased that there is talk of turning the G7 into a D10 group of democracies. There's also a summit of democracies that President Biden is proposing, and I hope that will focus extensively on China. But there's a need also for, as we're doing today, for the different people groups who are suffering under the CCP to do more together and to unite and speak out for each other. And finally, I would just say we have in this country, and I don't know, Rahima might say more about this, a genocide amendment that Parliament is trying to make to the trade bill. And although that doesn't directly apply to Hong Kong, it's certainly very relevant to the Uyghurs. And I hope that we will do everything we can to support that and to end our strategic dependency, but also our strategic complicity with the CCP's crimes, and to stand up for Hong Kong, but also for the Uyghurs, for the Tibetans, and for everyone suffering under the CCP's rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. On that very apposite note, may I presently request Rahima to take over and afford us a mise en scène of what is happening in East Turkestan. Rahima, over to you, please. Yes, Rahima, please go ahead.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Rahima, you're audible. Thank you. Please go ahead. Over.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening wherever you are. And thank you so much for organizing this event. And it's always privilege and honor to be among such distinguished speakers, and extreme privilege speak after Benedict Roger. I am Uyghur myself, and thank you so much, by the way, for your kind introduction. I left my country in 2000 after witnessing the 1997 Gulja massacre, and that happened in my hometown of Gulja. A peaceful, very peaceful protest was suppressed by the military and killing over 100 Uyghurs, and later arresting up to 5,000 Uyghurs from my hometown. And that was the event that led me leave my country in 2000. And I never went back to my country because of my human rights activism work. And I always hoped that things might get better one day and I might be able to return home. But the situation never got better. As we know, since 1949, the CCP occupied my country, East Turkestan. Disaster never stopped, one after another. Rightist movement, 1958. Cultural revolution, 60s and 70s until Mao died. And now we are facing genocide. And since 2017, much of the world has closed its eyes to the brutal ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Uyghurs conducted by the Chinese government. And this oppression is nothing new. It's nothing new. I myself experienced this back in, as I mentioned earlier, 1997 Gulja massacre. However, but over the past 4 years, the situation in my country rapidly escalated. 4 years ago, I lost contact with my family, having 2 months couldn't get hold of anyone. And finally, when I spoke to my brother on the 3rd of January 2017, and when I asked him why no one is answering my phone call, and he said, they did the right thing. Please leave us in God's hands, and we leave you in God's hands too. Not long after this exchange, a news of the mass internment of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities into the so-called re-education camps started to emerge. And the Chinese government claimed it targets Uyghurs in order to crack down on religious extremism. But in reality, to become an extremist, in their eyes, you only need to participate in the Uyghur culture or religion. Activities as minor as growing beard, giving your child a name considered to be too Islamic, or attending a mosque can cause for incarceration. During my interpreting work, I have met many survivors from the 21st century concentration camps. And many of them revealed the absolute horror that they have experienced during the detention, during their incarceration. And you might have watched the latest BBC report about the gang rape, systematic gang rape of the Uyghur women in East Turkestan. I worked with the BBC reporters since October last year, investigating these claims. And we were lucky, Tursunay Ziyabudun and decided came forward, and she told the horror what happened to her. And also I have spoken to Sayragul Saudbay, a Kazakh ex-camp teacher, and she also revealed that one incident, how they were forced to watch a gang rape of a young 21-year-old Uyghur woman.
Rahima, could I pause you for one moment? These rapes which are happening by Han Chinese males, are they civilians? Because we do know that Uyghur men have been removed from families and Han Chinese men have been made to be domiciled with women and children in apartments where they are made to pass off as so-called male members of the household. And this is nothing but enforced concubinage by the People's Republic of China. Are these men PLA, People's Liberation Army troops, or are they also civilians, or are they a mixture of both? PLA troops and civilians, both Han Chinese males. If you could bring that to bear and qualify and let our viewers know what exactly constitutes the component of these Han Chinese males who are undertaking individual rapes, gang rapes, and enforced, officially authorized concubinage. Sorry to interrupt, but please continue now with that.
No, that's okay. I'm talking about the camp, or what is happening inside the camp. These other police, most of them are the police or the military. But according to Gulzira Saudbay, who is Gulzira Avulkan, I'm sorry, Sayragul Saudbay and Gulzira Avulkan. Gulzira is also from Gulja, and she was kept in several different camps. And she also revealed in this very report that during her time in detention, and she worked as a cleaner for 6 months. And one of her job was, she said that I was forced to remove women's clothes and fix their wrists on the bed. And the man came and raped this woman. She said men left money. Every time when they came and they left money. So to your question, this is a state-sponsored rape, and they also making money, just like using Uyghurs as slave labor, that the state is making money. This is an extreme situation. You mentioned about the Becoming Relative program. That's the cadres, the Han Chinese cadres. It was deployed in 2018, over 1 million. And it's a Becoming Relative. No, actually from 2017, but by 2018, the number increased. And most of these male cadres, they would go and stay with the Uyghur family at least 5 days a month. And most of these Uyghur families, the adults, the men already taken to camps. So they have this 5 together, sleep together, eat together, study together, walk together, etc. So this is the kind of green light that the CCP government is giving this opportunity and to abuse the Uyghur people and other Muslim people. And so this is what Sairagul Southby said, why they are doing all this. And she said, it is the Chinese government's very intent to strip us of our dignity and our humanity. So we know from the party lines, the Chinese own open sources, this is what they said: Uyghurs are like a malignant tumor. Islam is a mental disease. And it says you cannot uproot weeds one by one among the crops, one by one. You need to spray chemicals to kill them all. These are the party line. And we know up to 3 million Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities are now detained in these concentration camps. We know from credible report, more than 500,000 Uyghurs have been working as slave labor in cotton fields, and hundreds of thousands more forced to work in factories built inside and alongside camps. And we know over 1 million children stolen from their families and taken to secure boarding schools where their language and culture is taken away from them. And we know 16,000 mosques demolished, hundreds of Muslim graveyards destroyed, and millions of women facing forced sterilization, forced abortion, forced marriage to Han Chinese men. So where we are now, and this is where we are, and we already know that US, the Canadian Parliament, and the latest the Dutch Parliament parliamentarians voted overwhelmingly to the motion that what is happening to the Uyghur people is genocide and crime against humanity. And recently, only last month, Essex Court Chamber legal opinion report outlined how there is credible case that as part of a widespread and systematic attack on Uyghur people in the region, crimes against humanity are taking place, including enslavement, imprisonment, torture, rape, enforced sterilization, enforced disappearance, and persecution. Significantly, this is from their own report, it further explains a credible case that the crime of genocide is occurring, as there is evidence of an intent to destroy the Uyghur population as such, including through a pattern of Chinese state mandated conduct. This conduct includes the intention to infliction of serious physical and mental harm to Uyghur people in detention, measures to prevent birth within Uyghur community, and the forcible transfer of Uyghur children outside of their communities. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards.
Thank you, Rahima. And if you'll permit me also just to point out to this god-awful litany, and a gruesome one at that, one more point. particularly to our viewers and listeners who are Muslim on Facebook just now, that here you have state-sponsored forcible feeding of pork by these cadres who also reside with families. And not just right through the year, which of course is done, but particularly during Ramadan, which is a month of fasting and the holiest month of the Islamic calendar. And it's deliberately done on Chinese state channels and TVs to show the so-called one China policy, and that all are living supposedly happily with Han Chinese and men and Uyghur women and children consuming pork. And of course, to say nothing of Uyghur students who are forbidden from fasting and deliberately made to sit at lunch hours, daylight hours, during Ramadan with their deans and professors at Urumqi University. Before going on to talk about the One China policy with Tenzin Tsundue, let me just mention this much, Rahima, from the Times, the London Times, July 4th, 2019, when Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President Erdogan's office in Ankara, Çankaya Palace, put out this press release, and it is deplorable to say the least, but quote it I must. Quote, Turkey firmly supports the One China policy, and it's a fact that residents of all ethnicities in China's Xinjiang are living happily amid China's development and prosperity, close quote. I won't grace this by delving or elaborating on it, but ask Tenzin to presently join us and discuss about this One China policy, which he intends to ask New Delhi, as the world's largest democracy, to reconsider and still better repeal. Tenzin, over to you. Tenzin, are you there? I'm afraid I think we have a problem linking up with Tenzin Tsundue. Tenzin, are you still there? And can you join us? I believe there's a technical glitch. I regret this. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Debsarkar to take over if Tenzin can't join us momentarily, since time is passing.
Yes, certainly.
Mr. Debsarkar, would you please come in and offer us your thoughts? In the interim, perhaps Mr. Passang will see that Tenzin can presently join us in case if the connection has been disrupted. Over to you, Mr. Debsarkar. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. You're audible. Over.
Okay. First of all, I would really like to thank the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities for holding this very special, and very important web conference, and I'm very delighted to be a part of. And I will be always indebted to your kind words and introduction, Dr. Waghmar. So we have heard quite a lot from our previous esteemed speakers, especially Ben and Rahima, regarding the situation in Hong Kong and the Uyghur, the treatment of the Uyghur people. I would like to touch upon a few other angles, predominantly the surrounding of China, like from the international domain. As Dr. Waghmar has indicated, the largest democracy of the world is next door, which is New Delhi. So in order to understand the mentality or the behavior of the Chinese, Chairman Mao, in fact, he had this belief, a very firm one, that Tibet was the right hand palm of China, and it had 5 fingers. And the 5 of them were Nepal, Bhutan, and 3 especially Indian states, which is Ladakh, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. Now we know that we are currently living in a situation of a planetary pandemic, which is also originated from the Middle Kingdom. In spite of such grave threat to humanity, the Chinese PLA and the Chinese government obviously did carry out audacious activities in the neighborhood to tilt the balance of power. And when I say that, I refer to incidents in the south, north, east, west China Sea, whichever way you wish to look at it. Uh, um, in the Indian state of Ladakh, to be very fair, there were grave, violations, and more than, I think, around 20 brave Indian armed forces personals were killed, actually, or murdered in that incident. An unknown number from the Chinese side was also reported. Only recently, I think, the Communist Party has come out with a campaign of recognizing 4 of those Chinese soldiers who were allegedly murdered in that standoff. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the Communist Party and its collaborators will go to any extent in order to make sure that their side or their point of view of the story gets propagated on a global platform. And the only, probably the best alternate, or to counter this move is the People's Republic of India, which stands in the way of China. So of those 5 fingers which I mentioned, one was Ladakh, and then they are also very aggressively taking stance in the other fingers, which is Nepal and Bhutan. Very recently, there were differences of opinion with a very pro-Chinese government in Nepal, but apparently there were leaked information that the Chinese are trying to take over a few roads and riverbeds, in the area which traditionally belongs to Nepal. So friction has arisen, especially with, again, when we come to Bhutan. In 2017, we saw the Doklam crisis, in which India stood very firm against any Chinese aggression. So it is coming down to this scenario where China is trying to project itself, and this is the proposition the Chinese have, is when it comes to Asia, China is the gateway of Asia. For the whole world to look at Asia as a continent, China should be the gateway. However, when we come to the bigger, like the global standards, China talks about, G2. So they want to be part of a multilateral global forum, but an unilateral Asian forum, which is probably not accepted, because in Asia we got multiple ethnicities, multiple countries, multiple linguists. They do not represent the Chinese overwhelming majority, and I think India has the lead role to play in this, to counter this narrative and to build world opinion. And I would like to come to 2 points which Rahima, I'll start with Rahima, had made. It's regarding the violation of women. And when it comes to this, I myself, I have worked quite a lot on a very similar doctrine, which an all-weather friend of China, they, in the year 1971, which is Bangladesh now, it was East Pakistan then, they had a similar doctrine, the Punjabi, predominantly Punjabi Pakistani army, that they would transform the genetics of the people of Bangladesh, or the Bengalis as they used to say. And they had this campaign of rape and mass violation of women and children in order to achieve their objectives. So what Rahima has brought up is echoed through the actions of their friends. And I would have, probably, we have got no evidence, but I'm sure that they are hand in glove in advising the Chinese as to how you can deal with, because there was one question which was made to the present day Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he simply said that he had no information on the treatment of Uyghurs in the region. So it's very unfortunate to see such a comment. And when it comes to indoctrination, which Ben has highlighted today, earlier on, in England especially recently, we have seen a lot of news and other reports coming out that the Chinese party, or at the back end, are buying up a lot of private schools in England. So we have seen like a huge amount of cash flow coming into the UK, predominantly in the form of education. And not only they are trying to get the schools, but also they are promoting a lot of apps which are very pro-Chinese, pro-communist, to propagate their side of the story. So these are very worrying times, and I would probably request the enlightened elite and the other people who are involved to take notice of this, the Chinese approach in the region. And lastly, I would like to come to the COVID scenario, because we know that China also has developed a vaccine. However, to give some context and background, especially from the Asian point of view, is that when they were in the process of developing this vaccine, they were in consultation, and this is for a fact, with the Bangladeshi government. And they, in fact, sought a huge sum of money to co-fund such a research, and simply the Bangladeshi government couldn't afford it. And that's the same for other countries in the neighborhood. Whereas if you come to the Indian side, I think India produces more than 60% of the vaccine, and they have given it out almost free of charge to the neighborhood in order to combat this plague. So it is very important that the world community recognizes the role of democracies, as Ben has said, that the D10 is probably a great alternative, but it should not emerge as to contain China, but we need to take into account the atrocities which has been carried out, and we have to hold them to books and bring the perpetrators to justice. This is what I would say, concluding. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Debsarkar. Just before we go on to Tenzin, and I hope he's momentarily waiting to join us, you mentioned the phrase "take notice." Well, I'm afraid it's not happening, and certainly Prime Minister Imran Khan is not taking notice, because he very honestly and dryly mentioned to Al Jazeera some time back, "I don't have time to think about the Uyghurs, and therefore by implication Muslims." And this from the Prime Minister of a self-styled Islamic Republic, and what was the first Muslim polity in the world as a confessional state founded in 1947. I needn't dignify the issue further by delving on it. So over to Tenzin now to discuss about the One China policy and his march. Tenzin, please go ahead.
Yeah, so do you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So my name is Tenzin Tsundue. I'm a Tibetan refugee born and brought up in India. I'm at the moment on a march that have started from Dharamsala in Himachal Pradesh, North India. And I have for today, stopped at a place called Shahabad. It's between Ambala and Kurukshetra in Haryana state. I have already walked almost about 260 kilometers, and I have 240 kilometers left to go all the way to Delhi. I'm doing this march mainly to highlight the issue of Tibet between India-China crisis. I'm doing it now and also giving myself 1 month time. This is to create a momentum and create this awareness in India. Ever since the Galwan Valley massacre happened, I think India awakened to a new reality. Though late, nonetheless, India is awakened today. For a very long time, India had been thinking that China is our neighbor, and China is, because richer and more developed than India, India thought that China is going to invest in India and China can help develop India. And Chinese presidents, prime ministers, one after another, they kept on coming to India. And Indian prime ministers, whether they belonged to the Congress party or BJP party, they kept on saying that China is our neighbor and these are two civilizational giants in relationship, which is absolutely untrue. There has been no civilization relationship between China and India. Because between China and India, that always been Tibet, the buffer zone. And that for British Empire, when they ruled India for 200 years, they strategically maintained Tibet as the buffer zone between China and India. And also in the great game, Tibet was significant as a buffer zone, also to keep the British Empire in South Asia away from the Russians. So the importance of Tibet as a buffer zone, as a cushion from threats from China and Russia was significant for British Empire, and therefore British Empire always kept Tibet um, um, as a protecting shield from foreigners from the north. As if this significance was not understood, the modern day Indian leadership completely missed this opportunity. And the first Indian Prime Minister started with Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, which meant that India and China are brothers, and started with that. And therefore, the first Indian Prime Minister completely gave up on Tibet. And in 1954, made Tibet declared in the trade agreement in 1950, in the Panchil agreement, that Tibet is a part of China. So it started from there. It's a false start for India. And subsequent Indian prime ministers, any of the leadership, they could not correct that course. Right after 1954, there was major occupation of Tibet, and which resulted in an uprising in Tibet, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan spiritual and political leader, having to escape Tibet and come to India. And that happened in 1959, and subsequently the Chinese PLA led their military invasion into Arunachal Pradesh, which is one of the important border states of India, and which froze India into China's care. And since then, India never talked about Tibet. Today, India is completely ignorant about Tibet. And last year, when the Galwan Valley massacre happened, most Indians couldn't place where is Galwan Valley. They couldn't understand where is Ladakh.
Exactly.
And that has happened because an intellectual political amnesia had been constructed in India, which completely negated the very existence of Tibet in India. And today, when I am walking in the street, on the highway, meeting with people on the road who are students, intellectuals, people in the media, intelligentsia, or just common ordinary people in the street doing their shopping, whatever, when I tell them that Tibet had been India's largest neighboring country, which was 2.5 million square kilometers of land, and India is, mind you, is 3.2, which means Tibet is 2/3 the size of India. And between Tibet and India, it's the longest land connected border of 4. So when such is going on, there is dearth of information about Tibet in India. So when I'm leading this march, I'm constantly reminding Indians that the border is Tibet border, it's not China border. As most Indians continue to say, it has become a common lingo among the Indians to say China border, because of the threats from China. So it becomes a constant reminder. But I have to remind them that in India, one of the strongest military systems and policing and armies is Indo-Tibetan
Border police.
Border Police.
Yes.
It has been established from 1962. For an important reason, it has been created, and it plays significant role in protecting the Indian territory all across the Himalayan regions, from Ladakh to Arunachal. So today, if I wrap up, the situation in Tibet today is China has controlled entire region of 2.5 million square kilometers of land. China is mining in Tibet. China is trying to rehabilitate, force Tibetan nomads and farmers to settle down in reservations, kind of artificial villages, something like how the white Americans created reservations for Native Americans. Something like that is exactly what is happening in Tibet today. Tibetan nomads and farmers are losing their land in huge chunks of land, mountains and mountains and pastures. Tibetans are losing, and China is mining in lease. And the reason why one China policy, China continues to win in this, is because China is telling all the Western countries who they are trading with or who they have trapped them in the supply chain connection, is China is saying that we are mining in Tibet. Tibet is this important source of resources for cheap made in China products. And therefore, because all these other third countries are benefiting from cheap made in China products for the past 30 years, none of them have ever spoken about Tibet and have blindly signed what is called One China policy. Now, China very cleverly makes One China policy as a precondition to any bilateral, trilateral, or international trade or political relationship with any others. So those countries, some of these countries who are in Europe and America and Canada and Australia, who have no linkages with Tibet whatsoever, they also say, vouch with China that Tibet is a part of China. And in a connection, when I say One China policy, it's not just about Tibet. It's also about East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia and Manchuria and China's constant violations of democracy and threat to the very survival of the Hong Kong people, and also about the threat on a threat of military invasion of Taiwan. So all that is going on, and international communities are supposed to keep silent about all this that China is doing, and they are supposed to bear with China bully. And this is what has been going on. So I am on the way to Delhi. I'm going to request the Prime Minister of India to repeal One China policy. That for India, firstly, it is wrong to recognize an occupied country a part of China. Number one. Number two, when China does not respect One India policy, why should India respect One China policy? Number three, One China policy is not in the interest of long-term security of India. Number four, One China policy is extremely costly for India. India has been spending crores of rupees every single day on the Himalayas. And India could use this money for India's education, infrastructure development, and for health. If Tibet becomes free and independent, and China would be thrown out about 1,000 kilometers away from the Himalayas. And my last reason, because of the Galwan Valley massacre, India has a reason to respond to China. International communities are waiting for India to give a response to China, and Modi government is yet to give the reason. And I am suggesting that Modi government's absolute fitting reply to China is Tibet, and question China's One China policy, with which India will come to position of power, where India can question China's what is called national integrity, which includes Tibet, 2.5 million square kilometer of land, East Turkestan, 1.8 million square kilometer of land, Southern Mongolia, 1.2 million square kilometer of land, Manchuria, 84,000 square kilometer of land, and China's constant threat on Hong Kong and Taiwan. All of this, India can question China and completely dislodge China from the diplomatic and political equation. This will immediately bring India onto position of power. And all the countries around the world can immediately come to position of power when they deal with China. And I am suggesting this not only to the Prime Minister of India, but other communities, Tibetans and Uyghurs and Hong Kong and many other peoples in Europe, in America, in Australia, in Japan. Many of them are also leading repeal One China policy campaigns in all other countries. If this is international coordinated, we can dislodge China. And this is what is happening now, and this must happen, and it's time.
Thank you very much, Tenzin. And can I say, to all your notes which you have assiduously collated to present to the Indian Prime Minister, could you add just this one more factoid to bring to his attention and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs as to why India should garner some gumption in standing up to China's One China policy? Tenzin, you mentioned about cheap resources from Tibet and cheap slave labor. Put aside resources, what about the most precious resource, water? The Tibetan plateau is the Asian pole, or the third pole known in the world, from which 6 rivers flow, and 46% of South and Southeast Asia's lifeline depends on waters from Tibet, which is about a good 20% of the composite universal population. And that China can threaten not just India, but the rest of South and Southeast Asia on this count. Please bring that to Prime Minister Modi's attention too when you reach Delhi. Thank you. Mr. Rogers, if I could just open up now that all the presentations have been done. I had a question to bring forth. In your Al Jazeera interview of May 2020, you had occasion to point out that Hong Kong's days as a financial center, quote, are now in question, close quote. Mr. Rogers, that is ominous, shall we say, but don't you suppose it would also be business as usual with the rest of the world, considering, because Hong Kong brings to mind, at least to someone like me who was a long-term resident of Bahrain, which was also and remains a finance center for banking and offshore banking particularly, that despite the authoritarianism in that island state in the Persian Gulf, it's still business as usual in Bahrain. What is there to say it would not be so, and that the world would turn a Nelson's eye to Hong Kong? Please.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent and very important question. I think that I would say that I would revise my comment slightly by saying that I think for many international companies who value the rule of law, transparency, an independent judiciary, and chose Hong Kong as a hub because of those characteristics of Hong Kong, as those are increasingly dismantled and undermined in Hong Kong, I think international confidence in Hong Kong will reduce. But at the same time, one thing that has become apparent to me since I made those original comments is that actually one of the reasons the CCP has been able to do what it's done politically in Hong Kong is that for some years they have been building up what is known as the influence of red capital that is associated with the CCP, and they've actually become a very dominant force in Hong Kong's economy, in its financial sector, in the real estate sector, and across business. Chinese money, Chinese Communist Party money, is very dominant, and that's resulted in, for example, pressure on press freedom, because they've been able to buy up newspapers, exert influence on advertisers, and create that kind of financial pressure on independent media. And in fact, Hong Kong Watch has a report coming out this coming week on red capital. So that's a revision to my earlier comment. I think that the CCP is able to get away with doing what it's done in economic terms because of its own presence in Hong Kong's economy. But I do still think that in the long run, for many international companies, they will begin to look elsewhere, because what made Hong Kong a safe place to do business in was that transparency and rule of law that is now being dismantled.
Thank you very much, Ben Rogers. And on this particular note, if it's a crumb of comfort, you may have been intimated that the SOAS Student Union last week resoundingly passed resolution condemning what is happening in East Turkestan as genocide, regardless of the qualifications thrown up by The Economist in an issue a fortnight ago. And that SOAS has urged its governing body, your alma mater, to look into investments with the PRC on that count. So, like I said, it's just a crumb of comfort and nothing more. Which brings me to Rahima, and no pleasant tidings. Rahima, but on this count, my question to you would be this. What solidarity is there in the East Turkestan scenario unfolding in front of us? Besides Uyghurs, there are also Kazakhs who've been interned and some Kyrgyz. But Rahima, can the Uyghurs count on any solidarity, any confessional empathy from Hui Muslims in Ningxia and elsewhere, for instance? Or are they also, need I add, too scared to speak up lest they receive the wrath of the Peking Politburo? Could you comment on that, please?
Thank you. That's a great question. But sadly, I mean, I'm sure people want to help. People also, they are very worried. Hui Muslims are very worried as well, from what I know from some of the articles and some people that I spoke to. They're very worried that if they're going to be the next, the China's persecution on religion, not only just Islam, but on a religion, is really become one of the worst crises since she took power, one of the worst human rights abuses. And of course, in China, you hardly see any protests happens even in mainland China, not let alone for the Hui people to protest against the Han Chinese, the CCP regime, because they feel or show solidarity for the Uyghurs and other Muslims. Simply, it's not possible because of the way how the protest was treated from the past experience. So sadly, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Anyone in China can show like open support.
Rahima, just one quick question before I move on to the other speakers. Is the fate of the Uyghurs also that of the Falun Gong? Are they harvesting organs from Uyghur males and females too? Say, for example, kidneys or livers for transplant and to be, donated to ailing Han Chinese, for instance? Have they also transposed that Falun Gong policy to healthy Uyghur males and females? Because we know there is the so-called health checks for all policy for 12 million Uyghurs, which Sophie Richardson, of course, of the HRW called health violations and privacy violations for all. But could you comment on if organ harvesting and donations are being undertaken also in these detention camps, please?
It's very real. It's very real. I believe even before Falun Gong people were targeted, Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities were targeted well before that time. And you might know Anwar Tohti, the Dr. Anwar
Yes.
Tohti, who confessed that while he was a trainee doctor and he did involved in one of the operation, how they opened, a prisoner who was shot, the death during the execution, and before he died, they had to remove the internal organs. So it's very real, and we know from 2009 that Urumqi massacre, or the Chinese government said Urumqi conflict, thousands, many thousands of Uyghurs disappeared. After that conflict, the extrajudicial killing and extrajudicial arrests were introduced. And we are actually investigating this. There will be a very extensive report, hopefully by the end of this year, about this situation, and interviewing some doctors and some ex-camp survivors, and also the people who worked in these camps, prisons, and also many Uyghurs who served prison sentence prior to this camp network started, there is sadly a very large scale of organ harvesting is happening. We know that the airport, the organ channels and also halal organs were advertised. Now they removed after this was in the news. So yeah, it's chilling. It's chilling situation.
Thank you, Rahima. And it's not a pleasant note to end on, but thank you ever so much for your contribution and for bringing yourself with immense dignity and courage to narrate all this so graphically and so poignantly to all of us. We are beholden to you, and no doubt we will be coming back to you on this on several occasions, even though it is gruesome to rehearse the obvious to all of us. Mr. Debsarkar, very quickly, and then because our time is flying, could you tell us what India could do next in the Indo-Pacific Quartet? And then Tenzin, the final question for you before we wrap up is this. Do you see yourself also marching in as a one-man moral crusade marcher, which you are, also marching in Sri Lanka next door, which is a Buddhist polity, and to make Sri Lankans aware of what is happening to fellow Buddhists in Tibet? Perhaps you could cogitate on that while Mr. Debsarkar affords us a response on what I've put to him. Mr. Debsarkar, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waghmar. Yes, with regards to the Quad, we will have to wait to see what is the new direction from the United States administration and how things play out. However, when we speak of Quad, one angle I think we need to keep our focus on, which is the canal in Thailand. The canal which is China is building to connect, the both sides of the ocean, so they could bypass the Malacca Strait, and that could very well be the next flashpoint in my calculations and opinions. So there will be probably the maritime domain, and especially the Indian Ocean region, will be hotly contested. And I'm sure it is called the Indian Ocean for a reason. And obviously, India will take the responsibility. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Debsarkar, for putting it so succinctly. Tenzin, would you care to share your thoughts on, well, shall we say, Colombo calling?
Did not go there to protest. I went there to talk about Tibet, and it was an educational tour because I was speaking in series of lectures in a school. Now, in my political activism, I believe in constructive program like how Gandhi used to bring about. Instead of protesting, if you are speaking, connecting with people, making friends, even winning over adversities, then you could bring forces together. Even to your what is called enemy, you could even speak, reason out, speak emotionally, you can connect. I do not think religion has connected people in the way humanity has. If religion could connect, then East Turkestan, Islamic country who is facing genocide, must get support from all the Islamic countries, which is not happening.
Exactly.
So religion is not connecting. Tibetan Buddhist leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has been loved and respected around the world, has been shunned by all the Buddhist leaders. Why? And also Buddhist countries, Vietnam, yes, Thailand, Laos, Korea, and also Sri Lanka, Burma. Why? Because they are afraid of China, and also they want to trade with China. So religion religions in a way is not a connecting point. It's a luxury. When it comes to economy, it's only secondary. I think what should be connecting is humanity. And therefore, I walk not to protest. I walk to meet people, connect with them, speak to them, tell them my story. You know, today when I walk, I say, चाइना ने हमारा देश कब्जा किया, मैं एक रेफ्यूजी हूँ, और अब मैं भारत सरकार को अपने देश की बारे में बताना चाहता हूँ और उसका सपोर्ट लेना चाहता हूँ. You know, I speak in this way. I say that China has invaded my country. I'm a refugee, and I'm going to New Delhi to meet with the Indian Prime Minister and say that independence of Tibet is in the interest of long-term India's security. So when I say this, everybody understands this, because there is not only my plight as a refugee, but there is interest for them. So therefore, I think this kind of voice could connect with people, or even in Burma or Thailand or anybody else. Even in China, you know, the Chinese people are suffering today. You know, we are not against China. We are not against Chinese people. Chinese people themselves are suffering. So we want to find freedom not only for us, but also to the rest of the Chinese occupied countries, and Chinese people themselves must get freedom and democracy, and they must also have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and press freedom, which they had been singularly denied of. And China has created this false idea of development where they constantly count GDPs only in numbers, and they actually do not include humanity. They do not include human aspiration for freedom and joy. It's not there in their economics, in their idea of development. And that false development idea of development is what they are practicing and what they are trying to impose upon China occupied countries. So therefore, when I question one China policy, I am saying 60% of China's total landmass, which is 9.6 million square kilometer, out of 9.6 million square kilometer of land, 60% is occupied country. It is what we say in Hindi, chori ka maal hai. So when we question this, then China singularly stands exposed of this imperialist, expansionist design. And this, all countries around the world, without exception, must ask this question. Because these countries, including United Kingdom, who is witness to Tibet independence, cannot be blinded by promises of money with China. And now that differences between United Kingdom and China are rising, United Kingdom is slowly starting to speak about East Turkestan genocide, and I'm sure United Nations will also start to take up when other permanent security members start to speak. So the United Kingdom has particular role to play in speaking up, and United Kingdom was such an empire and has now seen the reality, and therefore must help occupied countries to find freedom. The United Kingdom must stand with the people who are occupied, brutalized, and traumatized, and must not stand with the Chinese colonial imperialists.
Thank you very much, Tenzin. That was nothing if not a percipient point on which to conclude what you pointed out as to how Buddhist countries are also in hock to communist colonialists, just as Muslim countries are. The OIC, for one thing, all 57 members of the Islamic ecumen who have nothing to say to China, but go about conducting trade deals, just starting with the new Sino-Iranian agreement as part of the BRI, which we will now see, not to mention deplorable Pakistan, Turkey, and the like. So the situation is similar or near similar in the Buddhist world too, as how the Dalai Lama is, as you put it, shunted out. And that was a very percipient point I had not hitherto reflected upon. It only remains for me to thank all our speakers for a most scintillating session. And of course, this was brought through the good offices of Mr. Tsering Passang, the founder of the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. I am confident that we will gather once again to deliberate on this topic, which is not going anywhere soon, but to cogitate on the injustices being visited upon Chinese and non-Chinese who suffer under the yoke of the CCP and the Peking Politburo. So thank you once again to all of us who joined us online, and to the Global Alliance for affording us this opportunity. And yet once again to all my speakers. Thank you ever so much. Goodbye.